Coming up on this week's show, a long-lost Atari game is brought back to life.
The coolest charity shop find this year.
And we chat to Amiga legend Randell Jesup.
And the Retro Hour podcast is brought to you each and every Friday with our incredible friends at Bitmap Books. Now, one of my favourite books that they've done recently is The Art of the Box, taking you back to the days when those all-important purchasing decisions were made by the quality of a game's cover, and celebrating some absolute legends and some of the biggest titles from the biggest studios and software houses like Ocean Software, Konami, Capcom, and lots more as well. You can check that out, and actually we've got you an exclusive offer. You can get £5 off The Art of the Box by using our exclusive code RH5 at checkout. I'll put that in the show notes. That's valid until the end of June. You can check that out on the rest of their retro gaming collection at bitmapbooks.com. Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 433, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And a very warm welcome to the podcast, a show that comes out every single Friday and celebrates all things about the wonderful world of retro gaming and technology, brings you up to speed on all the big happenings in the world of retro from over the last week, and we welcome on a veteran of the industry to tell us their story, the companies they worked on, the software that they worked on back in the day. That's what we do on the podcast in the second half every single week. And hands up, we make no apologies that you and I are going to proper geek out on the second half of this podcast, Ravi.
Oh, yes, definitely. On this podcast, we are Amiga fans. Me and Dan. Joe doesn't know what an Amiga is, but...
Yeah. But he has to be an Amiga fan by default, because we're dragging him around all the Amiga events.
Well, through osmosis.
That's it.
It's kind of, gone into Joe's blood. But we've got a member of the original Amiga team here, the senior software engineer of Commodore Amiga, Randell Jesup, coming on the show.
Yeah, now this is a really interesting chat. We've had other members of the Commodore and original Amiga teams on. RJ Michael's been on the podcast, Dave Haney, David Pleasance. We've had a lot of Amiga guests on in the past. But this week, I think it's quite interesting because Randell, he was uniquely placed, working at Commodore from the late 80s to pretty much the time of their demise. And he worked on some really interesting products and, stuff that we don't hear talked about all that much anymore, including things like, the Amiga operating system development at the time, and going from, Amiga fans will know what a big jump version 1.3 to 2.0 was, and that came out in the early 90s.
Yeah, and stuff like, the Amiga exec design as well, and multitasking, like the structure, the expandability with device drivers and stuff. It's really, really interesting OS, and, we talk about some of the planned projects like the AAA chipset that didn't happen. And
Ombre.
Yeah, amazingly, he's sitting there on the interview with a AAA chip in his room, which is just absolutely mad. And we also go back in the days as well, because we talk about PlayNET, which was a gaming system that was kind of before Quantum Link.
If anyone's ever seen the TV show *Halt and Catch Fire*, the second series is kind of based upon PlayNET that Randell was working on back in the mid-80s. It's quite an interesting story. It was like very early online gaming, wasn't it?
Yeah, and then it morphed into AOL later on. And then after Amiga as well. So, of course, the interview, the majority of it is Amiga. We go on to Scala as well, which was another company that was kind of in the Amiga world. But Randell moved on to them. And then he moved on to Mozilla as well. So he's the senior staff software engineer at Mozilla at the moment.
And it tells you why you should be switching your browser over to Firefox today, if you haven't checked it out for a while. So we'll hear about that. We talk about some great stuff in the Amiga section as well. I mean, CDTV. He actually worked on the unreleased CDTV sequel, CDTV CR, I think it was called. We hear all about that. Then obviously CD32 coming along as well. And for me, I just love nerding out about all this stuff. I think, it's really interesting. So, we even talk about SCSI devices. And you mentioned Scala as well, which for people that might not remember Scala, that was basically you could say the early 90s version of PowerPoint, wasn't it? It ran on Amigas. And I've actually been playing around with it because obviously your big Amiga event is coming up in a couple of weeks, Ravi, that we'll talk more about in a second. But we're selling some of our Retro Hour books on one of the stands there. And I came up with this idea the other day that it'd be great if I had a CD32 there with a CRT monitor running basically a rolling advert presentation for the book made on the Amiga. So I've actually been spending quite a bit of time in Scala over the last couple of weeks. You've been
sending me messages like, how do I do this effect? Yeah. And I'm trying to remember 30 years ago. But Scala's absolutely amazing. Really, really great piece of software. And I can't wait to see your presentation there.
Yeah, I've been watching some of the included demos with Scala. I wouldn't expect mine to be anywhere near that standard, but I might rip off some of those templates. It looks very powerful. So, I mean, we make no apologies. We know we talk about the Amiga a lot on this podcast, but we love it. So, Randell Jesup, our special guest, a little look inside that time at Commodore and the Amiga, and like I said, after, into Mozilla and Quantum Link and all that as well. Really interesting chat. He's going to be our special guest on the show in around half an hour from now. Now, we did mention, obviously, your big events coming up. For people that don't know, maybe new listeners, give us a little reminder on what it is, Ravi, and when it is.
It is the UK's Amiga show. So this is the Commodore Amiga show, 29th and 30th of June, 2024. It's a really cool event. We have trader space, community space. We've got talks from Revolution Software, Sensible Software, and the demand's been really high. We've actually hit we're about 20 tickets off selling off. So I've held some back on the Saturday, and I'm going to release them on Monday the 17th. So those last 20 tickets people can get, but also Sunday tickets. Sunday's always at these shows, people are a bit hungover. They sell a bit less. So.
Well, we have a massive rave on the Saturday night, don't we? So.
Yes, exactly. And the tickets will be available on the door at the rave, but also on the Sunday as well. And we've already sold nearly 250 to 300 for the after party.
Nice.
Which is going to be huge. And we've got 5 acts, and that's going till 2 a.m. I've already had people I can't last till 2 a.m. I'm you
get a grandpa nap in the afternoon after the show.
Yeah, you can come and see a bit of it. But I'm really excited, and it's all kind of coming together, and it's just the nervous period now. Until it happens, and then it's what are we going to do next year?
So if you want to come along, like I said, there are still a few tickets available. Some more for the Saturday, the final few coming out on Monday, happening in Nottingham, end of the month, 29th and 30th of June. What's the website again for tickets?
Amigashow.com.
Cool, so I'll stick that in the show notes as well. And I know there are quite a few patrons coming along, so it will be nice to meet a few people. Like we said, we'll have a few of our books available for sale there as well, so if you wanted one of those, definitely look out for us at the event. Kickstart coming up in Nottingham in a couple of weeks. Right then, stories time. Been a busy week in retro again. And I always like it when long-lost games make an appearance, particularly something as famous as Tarzan. Because it turns out there was a version of Tarzan that was meant to be released on the Atari 2600 that was a casualty of the North America game crash in the mid-80s, and then was kind of considered lost. But it turns out now anybody can play it.
Yeah, this has actually been happening for 2 years, this story, but it's only kind of come to light now. So the game Tarzan was made by Coleco, which is quite funny because it's become full circle, because only last week we were talking about how Atari has just bought Coleco.
Yes.
And for various reasons, the game never came out on the Atari 2600 back in the 80s. And as you say, considered a lost game. And those interested in what the game is, it very much like Pitfall.
What do you think of it? Yeah, let's talk a bit about the game, because I watched this video. I've seen a lot of the comments saying, thank God this never came out. It looks dreadful. Personally, I think it looks really good.
I think it looks all right. For me, like I say, it reminds me of Pitfall.
Yeah, definitely.
Swinging across the holes. And
it's got those platforming elements as well.
Yeah, platforming elements into it and everything. But I think graphically, for the Atari 2600, this looks pretty up there.
Yeah.
The graphics, I think it looks really nice and bright and colourful. Lots of colours, lots of sprites going on. And it isn't just swinging across holes. There's other levels, where you've got to climb up a cliffside, mountainside, dodge boulders and stuff like that. All stuff Tarzan would probably do in the jungle. So I think it looks quite an interesting game.
Music sounds great as well for the Atari 2600, I thought.
Yeah, exactly.
Although there is one bit, if you watch the video, the crocodile on the second level, my God, the guy dies about 20 times before falls in his leg. It looks brutal.
That's probably why people are saying it's an game, because it looks difficult. But yeah, so a private collector actually bought the demo cartridge off an ex-employee of Coleco in 2022. And this private collector is Rob, aka Atari Spot, who's the collector. And he's reached out to the Atari homebrew, community.
Yeah.
And a programmer who, I don't want to ruin this, Thomas Jenzik, I think it's pronounced. He has got the game running on emulation, and they've finally been able to dump the game for everybody to play.
Nice.
So 2 years it's taken for this to happen. But as you say, it's always nice to see these long-lost games, whether we've heard of them or not.
And I think it was such a big franchise. I mean, Tarzan was massive back in the day, huge franchise.
Yeah.
So I think it would have been popular. I mean, and it looks, you can tell it's a Tarzan game. You got obviously the swinging across ropes. The combat mechanics look pretty good as well. His little fist punch.
Or just the underpants as well.
Yeah.
Just the underpants and his little toga.
So, yeah, it's interesting to hear that story. And I mean, there is a really long article that I'll link up in the show notes as well, if you want to real dissection of exactly how they got this working. Because there were some, technical kind of firsts on it as well, including it had bank switching, to overcome the limitations of the 4K Atari cartridges. And by the look at this article, it was kind of one of the first games that did that, and they kind of had to figure out how that would work back then. So that does sound quite interesting. So, yeah, there's quite a long article on gamehistory.org all about how the game's been preserved and recovered as well. So if you want to check that out, I'll link that in the show notes. And the ROMs are available now to play on your original hardware or emulation. So welcome back, Tarzan. Now, speaking of Atari, a studio that were acquired by Atari about this time last year, Night Dive Studios are back in the news this week.
Night Dive Studios are just killing it at the moment with all their, the different remakes and remasters they've been doing. A lot of first-person shooters over the last couple of years, but this is one I'm really excited to see. And I actually sent you guys the trailer when I saw this earlier this week.
Yeah,
sent
you
a load
were
of my
well
old school
excited
friends
about this.
And this is actually, if you ever want to check out our other show, The After Hours, I actually talk about this on an underrated games episode we once did. This is the remaster of The Thing. So the John Carpenter's The Thing, the 1982 film. In 2002, they made they made a sequel video game to that for the PlayStation 2, which did sell 1 million copies. But I don't see a lot of people talking about it. Is going to be remastered and be coming out later this year. Don't think it's your guys' cup of tea, because it is a very hard, scary horror game with lots of blood and guts.
Too scary for Ravi, too tough for me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, but I quite like the look of it, in this kind of form. It reminds me of Half-Life, actually. I don't know why. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like I say, I'm really excited for it. I think Night Dive, everything they touch at the moment just turns to gold. Usually they've not really said a lot about it so far, other than it's going to be on all modern systems and computer, and it'll be in 4K, 120 frames per second, etc. I will admit it is a little bit of a clunky game if you go back and play it, and it's not a game I completed because it was very difficult and sometimes a little bit confusing in terms of how to, because it's a third-person shooter, but it's also a survival horror, and there's a whole kind of trust meter with it, kind of based off the game, based off the film, because in the films, if you haven't seen The Thing, it's about an alien life form that mimics other people, and you don't know if that person's an alien or not. And you have the same thing in the game. So as well as running around on this Antarctic base, where you've got to worry about ammo and you've got to worry about freezing to death, and you've also got to worry about if any of your teammates have been infected and have become the Thing. And it was always a bit difficult to understand how that worked. And even to a point where I've seen people I'm on a retro selling page on Facebook, and I've seen people trying to buy this game now, but they want to make sure the original comes complete with the game's manual, so they can so they know what they're doing. And when I played this as a teenager, I obviously didn't read the manual, and I
had time for that when you were a teenager.
Yeah, exactly. And I'd get so far in it and then just get killed by one of my teammates who transformed into the Thing.
Right.
So what I'm getting round to is Night Dive. They do usually kind of put some kind of quality of life improvements into the games. They play around with them enough because they're remasters, they're not remakes. So, they upscale the graphics and everything, and they usually modernize the controls, so that the triggers are the shooting buttons and the aiming buttons and stuff like that. But often they will put So something in there just to make the game a little bit more modern and playable. You know, they might add a meter to the game, like a trust meter or something like that. Obviously, they've not made any announcements of that so far, but I would quite like to see something like that, so it's a little bit easier to pick up and play.
It looks like there's a lot of snow effects in it as well, and you know, the kind of original had snow, but it's moved on a lot now.
It has moved on.
So it could be very, very atmospheric.
I think weather in games is one thing, and water as well, that, you know, has really improved over the last couple of decades. When you go back to 90s games, that's one thing that always stands out to me, just how much that's improved. But you're right. I mean, from what I've seen of them, I mean, we talked about that 3DO remaster that did that PO'd game a while ago. And I haven't played the remaster they did, but I've seen a lot of reviews saying that basically they really improved that game. And actually, for the first time ever, it is actually a playable game now.
That's good. Good to hear.
And speaking of which, we've also announced we're going to be remastering another 3DO game, the first-person shooter game Killing Time.
Yeah, saw that. I don't know anything about Killing Time, though.
It's kind of one of the, I haven't played many FPS games on the 3DO, but that I think is up there. You know, it's considered one of the, it's a horror-themed kind of, you know, early 90s FPS game.
Yeah.
I think it came out around 94-ish, 95. Cool. I've only played it briefly, but in terms of 3DO FPS games, that's generally the one that most people talk about.
It had a lot of FMV in it, and it's like, you know, where they had a PO'd.
Yeah,
they're kind of redoing stuff and making it a bit more playable, which I like, you know, revisiting these titles, and especially it seems to be the case with FPSs as well.
Yeah, and I love kind of seeing, you know, remastering, like you said, that FMV era games. You know, it's always amusing to see them coming back. So that's just been announced. We haven't got a release date on that from what I've seen.
Just says 2024 at the moment. So you know, there's only 6 months left of it now. So I imagine probably towards Christmas time. I imagine.
Just announcing that, Joe, just give me heart palpitations. Only 6 months left. Anyway, while we're talking about the 3DO, how did we continue? It's been a bit of a week for 3DO news this week. If you have got an original system, this is quite cool because a lot of consoles that used optical drives back in the day, that is often the point of failure. And I've had a few, not many. I think my CD32, the laser on that started to get a bit weak a while ago, which fortunately turns out that the CD32 uses like a standard part that I think Sony used in Hi-Fi.
It was a bang-together system, wasn't it?
Yeah, so I picked up a new laser off eBay for $5, swapped it over, good as new. I'm not exactly sure what the score is with the 3DO's drive, but you bear in mind that era. The 3DO came out in, 93? So I imagine it was designed in 91, 92. A lot of the time back then you had very custom CD-ROM drives in that kind of single-speed era. But it turns out if you have got an original 3DO, the FZ1 model, the Panasonic, the one that I've got in my collection, that for me, when you say 3DO, that's the one I picture. If you've got one of those with a failing CD-ROM drive, there is now a rather affordable solution to replace it.
This is really good because of the price as well. I think I've seen these ODEs on other devices, and they're big.
These are optical drive emulators, aren't they?
Yeah, and that's kind of put me off. Some of them, I saw there were some good ones on the Dreamcast as well. Lots of people were doing that, and they were also doing mounts, so you could kind of mount the card in as well. I didn't know if they required soldering and stuff like this, but this one doesn't seem to require soldering either.
Yeah, this one looks very cool. It's just a small, basically a little circuit board that you put inside. You have some ribbon cables that would have previously connected to the CD-ROM drive. The good thing about this is, like you said, a lot of those kind of ODEs require you to take the optical drive out of like whatever system you're putting them in, because this one's so small and the 3DO case is quite big. It actually fits in there, and you can keep the original CD-ROM drive in there.
You're just re-clipping the cables, in, pretty much, just rerouting them. But also, I think you're loading it off a solid state drive. It's probably going to be a bit faster, isn't it, than like one of the older CD drives?
Than a single speed. I imagine it probably would be, because I think I've got a feeling the 3DO's CD-ROM drive was, a single speed. What are they, like 150 kbps or something? They're not very much.
It might speed up, gameplay time.
Yeah, stuff like FMVs and that could definitely help with that, I imagine. But the big news about this is there was already an ODE for the 3DO by a guy called Fixel, who made one called the 3DO ODE. They got really good reviews, but that cost $250. So this is basically a guy called FCare, who's basically made an open source board that uses Fixel's software. Now, from what I've seen, Fixel's actually worked with him on this as well and he's completely happy with it from the comments I've read online. But it really means that he was planning on open sourcing that software anyway, apparently. But this is a lot cheaper than the 3DO ODE. That was $250.
So the software's kind of the front end of it as well.
Yeah.
And then you have the hardware.
From what I've seen, it's basically the same software, so it should run exactly the same as the more expensive one. But I mean, they're selling these for $59.99.
And I don't know if the 3DO had any copy protection, but I probably think, you'd be able to load a lot of the games, from the collection, and probably some weirder stuff as well, and homebrew on there as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing. 3DO had no protection whatsoever, which for me, I mean, I haven't used mine for a while, but the failure on mine was the power supply. The caps in that kind of broke, and it kept just rebooting. So I recapped it because it's all like through-hole stuff. It was quite easy to do. But the optical drive still worked on mine last time. So for now, because, like I said, the 3DO has got no copy protection, it's easy enough for me to burn CDs for it. But I think if it ever did get to the day when, it probably will one day when the CD drive starts to fail, something like this will be quite handy. And actually seeing the price of CDs now as well. I saw the CD towers that you could get with like 100 CDs in.
Yeah.
They were going for like 30 quid in Asda last time I saw them. I remember they were like a $5 like 10 years ago. So,
still in some charity shops you can walk around and find them.
Yeah. I saw a load of Blu-rays, burnable discs in one recently, but I thought, what the hell am I going to use them for? So I resisted. Might regret that one day. But there you go. So if you don't want to burn optical discs and you just want a nice way of having all your 3DO titles playable on your original hardware, there is one slight annoyance about it that this is internal and it requires the use of a USB stick. And that means that basically every time you want to take the USB stick out, you've got to open the 3DO and pull it out.
Okay, yeah.
Which I'm sure someone will.
The next thing will be some extension where you can mount it on the front or something.
Yeah, I mean, there will be people who will just mod the system and use an extender, put it in the outside of the case. But it's a good thing that it doesn't require that because, some of us do like to not mod the hardware cases and stuff.
Yeah.
So, that is available now. I'll link that in the show notes too. Now, I was on holiday last week, went to lovely sunny Santorini for a week and took my Switch with me. I did send you guys some pictures of me hooking my Switch up to the hotel TV.
Whilst we were at work.
We got a picture pretty much every day, just like, how's your afternoon, boys?
How's the weather?
How's the weather? We're like, yes, we know, Dan, you're on holiday.
Well, I mean, it was very nice out there.
It was very nice.
But the picture I was talking about is the one I sent you of me playing Final Vendetta in the hotel room.
Yes.
Hooked up to the TV because I do love it when you go into a hotel room and they've got like accessible HDMI ports.
Oh my God. Years ago, I used to try and get onto those hotel TVs and it'd be like, how to hack the hotel TV to unlock the USB port. And really tough. But now they seem to be accepting of you putting your own stuff on.
Well, I left it plugged in. The missus are like, take that out if the cleaners come in. They'll go mad at you. I'll be all right. Don't worry about it. But yeah, I mean, I had a bit of because obviously it was a 4.5 hour flight over there and I was playing, Turtles on there, the Turtle Collection on my Switch, playing a bit of Final Vendetta, Streets of Rage 4 as well. I had a bit of a beat 'em up session last week, which was great fun actually. Funny to get some time to play these games. But if you are a fan of these kind of belt scrollers, I believe you call them, Joe.
Yep.
There is a new one on the way. Now this is a game called Deadly Metropolis.
There's definitely been since Streets of Rage 4 came out in 2020, there's definitely been a big resurgence. I mean, you just listed off a bunch of games there, so I'm not going to sit here and say all the same ones, but they've all come out in the last 3 or 4 years, and they've all come out to praise, high praise.
Yeah.
And it's excellent just seeing more of these games coming out, because obviously they just died off in the mid-90s when we went into the 3D era, which kind of segues quite nicely into this game, because I really like the look of this. So we've not got much on this Deadly Metropolis yet, other than some artwork, which does look very Streets of Rage-esque. And then we have got a 10-second clip of some of the gameplay, which I'll get onto in a minute. But the person behind this game is Din V. Abare, who actually did work on Streets of Rage 4.
Right.
As a consultant. So that would make sense that the game will have a similar vibe to Streets of Rage. And it is going to be launching on Kickstarter soon. So hopefully in the next couple of months. But gameplay-wise, obviously so far, we're just seeing, I say just, but we're seeing a beat-em-up. Lots of lovely sprites on the screen and stuff. But for me, graphically, I don't know if you guys agree, but this to me looks like a really nice Sega Saturn or PS1 kind of beat 'em up. So not so much 16-bit, but more towards the 32-bit beat 'em ups. You'd sometimes see where you've got your 2D sprites, which look beautiful, pixel art, but then you've got a 3D background. You know, we've got buildings in the background, and you're on a bridge. And I really like the look of this.
Do you remember one? I think it was called Tekken Tag.
Yes,
where it was
Tekken Force for Tekken 3.
It was kind of on an angle, and it was like a beat 'em up, but it reminds me of that, just the angle of where the camera is, you know.
It's quite high up, isn't it? You're kind of looking down on the characters from like an angle,
Yeah. No, you know what? You've just unlocked some memories there, Avi. Yeah, definitely. It does have that kind of, it was Tekken Force, which was a mode on some of the, I think it was on Tekken 3 and Tekken Tag, where it was that, you know, like you say, that side along beat 'em up. I really like the look of this, and just, you know, like I say, absolutely love beat 'em ups, so bring them on, you know, more than area for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very short trailer, like you said. It's only like 11 seconds long, and it's got some very nice artwork, I imagine, from the intro, or, you know, some cutscenes. But then you get into like the gameplay. Again, you've got those really satisfying thuds and punches. You know, I mean, when I was playing Final Vendetta on the plane, I had my headphones in, it was like just amazing. You know, the sound effects on that, the crunches and stuff.
Utah
as well.
Saints, isn't it?
And the music as well, obviously. Yeah, I mean, just for into the sound effects there. Though,
it's a hard game, though. That
it is. I must admit, Joe, I did actually put it down to the easiest casual level.
I'm not. I'm. You know what? I usually take the mick out of you down for this stuff, but I don't even think I completed it on casual. I think I got to like the second to last level, and I was like, that was on like my fourth try, and I was like, yo, this is hard. And that was when I was on holiday last year, so I need to go back to it as well.
I was on the plane, like Samantha was just watching something on her iPad, and I was like moving around with the car, just like taps me, just calm down.
It reminds me a bit of Metro Siege as well, which is the one that's coming out for the Amiga.
Yes,
it looks quite good. Yeah, it's got that kind of same style, but it's a bit more like 3D and less kind of 2D.
Yeah, bring them on, man.
A new golden age of beat-em-up games is upon us, it seems. So, like I said, launching on Kickstarter soon. The page is live, but there is no release date so far, just coming soon. So if you want to check that out, I'll put that in the show notes too. Now, you guys, you always have one thing that you do better than me. That is finding good scores in charity shops. I never get lucky at this. The other day, you were posting a few pictures of some games that you found in a charity shop, Joe, that were...
I don't know. I think Ravi's pretty good at charity shops.
I was building up to Ravi.
I messed up the other day. So this is a rare limited edition Hulk Xbox, which we'll talk about in a minute. Yeah. But I was in a charity shop, and there was a 360, Elite one. Like the black one's really nice, and it was like 20 quid. And it was all working and everything, and I was like, "Oh, I might pick that up." I don't know why I didn't pick it up at the time, and of course I went the next day and it was gone. Yeah. So yeah, I'm not amazingly good, but this guy seems to have really scored with this. I've never seen one of these Xboxes before.
And, well, this story then is there is a very rare limited edition Hulk Xbox. Now we're talking about the original, OG Xbox here, that was donated to a branch of the British Heart Foundation that they've now put on their eBay account. And I'm with you, Ravi. I looked at this originally and I thought, do you remember the Mountain Dew Xbox? They were green, weren't they? And I thought it's just one of them. I thought, oh, hang on. And this was for the 2003 movie Hulk that came out in association with Pepsi. This is a promotional item where I think the only way you could get this was to win it, wasn't there? And they only made about 50 of them. So these are very rare.
They're really rare. So the Mountain Dew one you just mentioned was in America, and they made 5,000 of them.
Yeah, which makes they're rare, but
makes it super rare, because obviously I don't know how many units the Xbox sold, but I want to say it was in the tens of millions, the original Xbox. I know that much.
24 million, there you go.
24 million, there you go. But yeah, this Hulk Xbox, bright lime green one, came out in the UK, and there was 50 of them made. And you had to win a scratch card from going to the cinema to see this film. And it was when you bought Pepsi and a popcorn deal, and then you would get the scratch card with it.
Which would have been awesome, face it. Like going to see a movie and then winning the latest games console in a disgusting green colour. Yeah.
And only 36 of them were apparently actually claimed and won during the run of the Hulk film. At the cinema, and 14 of them have gone unclaimed, and then they said there's about 20 of them known in people's private collections. There isn't really a lot about where this one came from. It was donated to the British Heart Foundation by somebody. I imagine, I could be wrong, I imagine they didn't really know what they had.
Can you imagine if it was your mum and she's cleaning out the attic? Like, I'll just donate his little stuff.
Yeah, that's the thing. And like, someone could go and just like make a load of money and be like, I bought it in the charity shop and there. But really nicely, they're doing all the proceeds going to the British Heart Foundation. Yeah. So, out of this auction, which I think is nice. I once went to a charity shop and there was these two lovely old ladies and they were selling loads of like Apple gear. And they were like, Apple keyboard for £2. And it was like all brand new. Wow. So I bought it and then I like gave them a load of money afterwards. And I was like, have this as the donation.
Yeah, I love it. It's another £2.
I gave them a lot more than that. And I was like, this is worth a lot more. And I told them how much it was worth. And they were like, oh, thank you, love. Well, but I think that's good to do.
Well, it's currently on £9,000 at the point of recording this on bid. Yeah. And that, I want to say it surprises me because I just don't feel like, yes, it's very sought after. There was only ever 50 made and there's only like 20 of them out there in people's collections. As far as we know, there's probably another 20 in people's attics or something. But £9,000, like I didn't quite realize there was that much love for the original Xbox. I don't know. I just don't feel like the original Xbox has like got the legacy of like, a limited edition PS1 or something. Do you know what I mean?
Well, you expect it more on like the Dreamcasts, don't you?
Yeah.
And, like they
even though the Xbox sold more
and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I know what you're saying though, Joe. It kind of feels like the Xbox wasn't all that special. It's just like it's just basically a Pentium 3 PC and
it was so
box,
special,
really.
Guys.
It was. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love the original Xbox, but maybe it's a time thing as well. Maybe it's starting to come into that now because original Xbox games. Last time I bought them, they were like dirt cheap, £1, £2, and I saw them in shops. Maybe it's just these.
No, I've seen them going up. Yeah,
a
lot recently. Yeah,
coming into that time now where it's going to start. I mean, there'll be a generation that are in their 20s now where this was their childhood system. It was kind of choose camp, wasn't it? It was like PlayStation or Xbox. And if you're in that Xbox camp, they were big, chunky, noisy things, but they're ugly.
They were awesome,
a lot of powerhouses. I love my original Xbox, but it's, I think this, I mean, if you're going to pay £9,000 for this, it's going to be like some hardcore collectors, isn't it, who just want rare gaming things.
Yeah, and it looks in great condition,
It does. It looks ugly like as sin, but...
No, very ugly, but there's like no huge scratches or anything like that. Oh, broken bits.
It's weird though, because it's kind of like like snot green.
It's kind of rave green as well.
Yeah, it doesn't look like the Hulk. Yeah. The Hulk is much darker green than that.
Yeah,
because it's got the sticker of the Hulk on the top where the Xbox logo is. Apart from that,
maybe when the Hulk blushes, he goes this kind of green.
Yeah, when he sees a price for this system.
Yeah.
But if you do want to get a very rare original Xbox, you still got a bit of time when the show comes out. It finishes at 9 p.m. on Saturday. So already 61 bids on that. It'll be interesting to see where that ends up. I've got a feeling it might be, what do you think, Joe? 15K?
I'm going to say 11,000.
Okay. Place your bets. So if you have got the spare money for that, I definitely haven't. But I'll link it up in this week's show notes, along with everything else we talk about as well. Now, we are going to be doing our Patrons Hangout a little bit later this month, because we mentioned we have got your massive Kickstart event coming up at the end of the month, Ravi. I imagine by Sunday evening, you're probably not going to be in any condition to talk.
I've taken Monday off work as well.
Yeah, I'm surprised. So we're going to be doing our next one on the first Sunday of June. That will be June the 7th. So for people that haven't been on a Hangout before, Joe, give us the sizzle.
The sizzle on the Hangout. Oh, wow. It's a hangout. We all hang out together. It's a funny one because it started as like a, kind of like a big Google Meets Teams meeting where we all were getting together in COVID.
Yeah.
And now we're like 4 years into it. And I just look forward to every month. And just, everybody comes on and we just have a laugh. And, we mostly start the conversation talking about retro, talking about games, tech, films, but it always goes off on a tangent. Last month we were talking about all different board games, which was really fun. Yeah, sometimes we just end up talking about our favourite films, what we've all just been up to and stuff like that. And it's just really, really nice. And we've made so many friends on there as well. We've met in person and stuff.
we're all into the same kind of stuff, and like the listeners also help us like shape the show actually. So you know, we had our Orbital interview recently with Pete on, who's one of our patrons, who's always on the Hangout as well. He's just been moving house, so he was going and unpacking all his boxes, kind of showing stuff there, and it's just fantastic to have that like connection, but also how it molds the podcast and you know, turns it into different stuff that we might not be able to explore ourselves.
Yeah, 100%. You know, we've got a wonderful community around the show. And obviously supporting us on Patreon really helps out the podcast as well, you know, helps us cover all our bills and running costs and everything too. So we really appreciate that. Like I said, we are going to be having, you know, a bunch of patrons meeting up at Kickstart as well. That's going to be awesome. Looking forward to that. And really, if you want to join the patrons community, now's a very good time to do it because you'll get invited to the Hangout that's coming up in a couple of weeks. We're going to be dropping at some point this month another episode of our bonus patrons only podcast for the gold members and above, the Retro Hour After Hours, which if you join now, you'll unlock 42 previous episodes of that. And we're going to be recording a new one before the end of the month. Think of a subject first. Suggestions always welcome. You get access to our exclusive Discord area. You get the normal podcast early some weeks. Patrons actually got it on a Tuesday last week.
Wow.
That's early. What day of the week is this? And also we remove all the adverts as well. So you also get an extra 10 minutes of news in every single episode. So if you want to join us on Patreon, all the details to sign up right now are on the website at theretrohour.com. Okay, then this week's special guest, we're going to be joined by Commodore Amiga legend Randell Jesup on the show in just a minute. Before that, let's just take a quick second to give a massive thank you to our lovely friends at Shopify. Now, you know Shopify, they're the ones with this sound. They are the platform which, if you sell anything online or in person, they're the all-in-one commerce to run, start, and grow your business. We've been spending a lot of time on Shopify over the last couple of days, haven't we, Ravi?
Yeah, I've been setting up Shopify because, you know, we want to sell our book digitally and we also want to sell it online. And Shopify's got the whole platform there that we can, you know, integrate with our website. And you could even just do it on an app. You can even do all those social media things like TikTok and all the modern stuff like Instagram.
Because it feels like at the moment, you know, everyone's got a little side hustle going on. You know, maybe you're selling games at your local car boot or, you know, retro markets or anything like that. I mean, the good thing about Shopify is, you know, we all know that when we go to these events, nobody carries cash. No. If you haven't got a card reader or any way to do that, you're going to miss out on a load of sales. So if you're selling anything, they're really good because they give you those, you can get those shop-ready point-of-sale systems. So you can do them in person, take card payments on them. And like you said, Ravi, you know, when you're selling online, they've got an incredible e-commerce platform, even connected to all your social media marketplaces, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok as well, full of industry-leading tools ready to ignite your growth and giving you complete control over your business and your brand. Best thing is, like you said, we've been setting it up. You don't have to like learn any new skills. There's no coding involved.
It's very easy, and you know that you can select your items. It has a pre-made way of doing it, but also it has 24-hour support as well, which is really important when you're kind of selling something.
Yeah, and we've got a really extensive course library as well. Award-winning help is available. And really, Shopify is there to support your success every step of the way. So if you sell anything at all, online or in person, it's time to get serious about selling and get Shopify today. Now, we'd love to give you a trial, and this is great value as well. If you head to this link right now, obviously, using these links, supporting our sponsors, helps out the podcast massively. Head to shopify.co.uk/retrohour. All lowercase, all one word, shopify.co.uk/retrohour. And I'll put that in this week's show notes as well. And get ready to take your business to the next level today. And you will get a £1 a month trial period by using that link. So you can check it out for just £1 a month. Shopify.co.uk/retrohour. And a massive thank you to our friends at Shopify for their continued support of our show. And get ready to hear a lot of this. All right, then. Well, thank you for checking out the news this week. We'll bring you up to speed on what's been happening again next Friday. And get ready for the main event. We're going to be joined by Amiga legend Randell Jesup. He's next on the Retro Hour podcast.
You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and we're here today with Randell Jesup. And Randell, you know, he was the OS group lead for Commodore Amiga and a senior software engineer. So we're going to get some amazing stories about Amiga, but also PlayNET as well, and Scala, what a legendary company Scala was. You know, Randall's now working as a senior staff software engineer at Mozilla as well. So we'll have a bit of a Firefox talk at the end. But first, how are you doing, Randell?
Okay, how are you?
Oh, great. It's excellent to have you here. And we have a question that we always ask our guests, like, what was your first computer memory that you ever had, or first time you ever, played on a computer and had a bit of a gaming experience?
Okay, so my first time I used a computer that I remember was so this was back in the 1970s in New York City, and it was either at my school when I was in 7th grade at Collegiate, where we had a time sharing system terminal into something, or it was at another private school that my uncle worked at, Dalton, which had a larger computer center with, a dozen or more thermal paper terminals where you could log in. And I remember playing, games like the old Star Trek thing and so forth, printed out on rolls of curling paper. So that's where it started.
And it must have been quite a slow game experience, but quite fun.
Yeah, very, very turn-based back then, and for quite a while afterwards.
Would you remember when you first got a home system? So
the first personal system I had lots of access to, in high school, I had lots of access to a PDP-8E with teletype terminals, where you had to toggle the boot sequence into the front panel to boot it. Lots of fun. 12K of memory. And that was my first programming experience. But my first personal system I owned was in college when I bought a TRS-80 Model 1 from a friend of mine for about $1,000 in 1982, something like that. I don't remember. Which I still have. It's in my basement. I have not pulled that one out to try to fix it yet.
What did you think of the TRS-80? And that was often nicknamed the Trash 80 by Commodore fans.
Yeah. I thought it was great. I did all sorts of stuff on it. Played lots of games. Wrote software to analyze stock options. Used it to log into the mainframe with an acoustic coupled modem, 300 baud. Had two drives on it, including a flippy drive for extra storage.
Nice. So I heard that, you mentioned then that you went to college. So you studied computer science. What made you want to go and study that then? And what was that course like at the time?
Well, so I went to RPI, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and I studied computer science there. I mean, I got very interested in computers back when I was in high school. I was, working on the PDP-8. I was, reading Byte magazine, all that sort of stuff. And so, science in general interested me, but computer science was definitely my main interest. That was one of the first big surge of computer science majors. It was still part of the math department there, but I was in the RPI chapter of the ACM, working on on chess programs in my designing chess programs in my spare time. We helping get some ancient hardware up that had been donated to the ACM, working on the mainframe, writing an implementation of Forth, the language Forth for the IBM 370, which didn't exist at the time. All sorts of stuff.
Well, were you using BBSs then as well? And what was your
There were no BBSs. World? There were no real BBSs then that I know of. They came along not that long thereafter, but I was never really into the BBS scene at all. I logged into one or two here or there.
Well, I was wondering then how you went and got involved with PlayNET as well. And
okay, so PlayNET was started by a few people, and almost a majority of the people who were hired by PlayNET, at least for the microcomputer side, were RPI grad students and students, and that's what I was. I got hired by them, when I was still about a year short of my degree, and they were in an incubator center at RPI, some cheap space that they to incubate companies. And they also had a bunch of some of the mini computer side of people were hired former Sperry Univac people, somewhat older than the rest of us working on the microcomputers, so on the C64s.
And what was PlayNet then for people who are not familiar with it?
So PlayNet was one of the early online services, dial-up, which was designed, from the name, obviously, around games, but it was also designed around chat rooms and message boards and shopping and all those sorts of things. It was for the C64, and you had to get a bunch of disks, most of which held the other games, but each different module they would load, whether chat or the messaging or whatever. And you dial into a local dial-up number, Telnet or TimeNet, and get connected to us at 300 baud. And you could stare in rooms and chat with people, which was by far one of the most popular things. Or you could play games while still chatting with people. We had we built an entire finite state machine language that ran underneath everything, while the games typically ran in BASIC or assembler. And so, it was pretty polished. We did all sorts of tricks to be able to switch screen modes on the fly with horizontal screen interrupts and so forth. And so it was very nice. And we charged by the hour for it, because that's how that's how you charged, several bucks an hour. And we were trying to find investment. We were trying to get included in when Commodore would sell modems. We're trying to get included in the box there. And after a bunch of negotiations, we were running short on money. We were competing with a Control Video Corporation, who had an online service that was nowhere near as nice as ours. And the understanding is that Commodore basically told them, we like your management team, but we like their software. And they told us, no deal. And we had no money, so the other CVC came to us and said, we will license your software, and we'll give you a small cut of the profits and some cash. And we had very little choice but to say yes. And we got some cash and some runway. And eventually, a year-ish or so later, we folded because we had fully run out of cash. It was the company sort of semi-existed after that to collect royalties, though CVC eventually got out of them. A couple of years later, CVC ported our software to the IBM PC and renamed it America Online.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it must have been quite difficult, maintaining an online system back then, just with the amount of numbers of people and also all that functionality you had going on there. How long did it take to develop, and what was it like, the actual running of PlayNet?
So it was developed in I'd say from the time it was started to the time it launched was, a year and a half-ish. Okay. The mainframe side was running on Stratus mini computers, which were fault-tolerant machines. You could literally pull one of the CPU cards while it was running, and it would say, please put it back. It was a lot of long nights, eating hot dogs in the break room because, when we were on half salary and had no other choice, we certainly weren't going out for lunch. I'm still in contact with a number of the people who worked there.
I was wondering, did you ever see the TV series *Halt and Catch Fire*? Because I know apparently the second season of that was kind of loosely based on PlayNet. I wonder kind of how accurate that was. If you saw
I've watched a little bit of it. I've been meaning to watch the whole thing, but because it would be very interesting to see how horribly wrong it is.
Yeah.
but I'm certain I wouldn't be surprised if they've caught some of the overall gist of how it all went.
So tell us about PlayNet kind of moving on to Quantum Link then. How did that kind of development happen?
So when CVC licensed our software, we provided some support to them to help them. I went down there a few times, and they did some minor changes, to the, how the menu system works slightly, and they relabeled it Quantum Link. So Quantum Link basically is PlayNet. the differences between Quantum Link and PlayNET are small. Other than they added, they did add some more games and so forth that that were on top of what we'd already had, at least to start with, and they made a few more changes along the way while it was still Quantum Link. They also created and ran. I believe they ran Bix for Byte as well, which was not based on C64s and so on.
I was wondering as well, you mentioned that it then went into AOL,
yes.
Kind of a modified version of it. What did you think of this idea of having a closed off internet kind of?
Well, I mean, the internet wasn't the thing it is today back then. When they created AOL, this was long before the first web browser existed. I didn't have, I'd had some internet access when I was at General Electric working on processor design after PlayNET. But so when it was first created, it was all the online systems pretty much were monolithic. So that wasn't a surprise back then. One thing that did surprise me about AOL was in about 2005, when AOL was mostly being accessed over the internet, though some people probably still did dial-up. After someone posted that they were trying to figure out how the AOL protocols worked on Slashdot, I went and they were confused by why certain values in the login messages would sort of increase and then reset and so forth. And I looked at it and said, oh yeah, that's the error correcting protocol I wrote for handling 300 baud modems with sliding windows and so forth for doing, because 300 baud modems weren't error corrected. And so you had to deal with lost, modified bits and so forth. I'd written all that for PlayNet, and they were still using it to do the login protocol, just the login protocol, I believe, for AOL in 2005. But they were using it over TCP, over a error corrected channel. So they had running an error correction over an error correction channel. It was kind of hilarious.
Must have been good code to last that long, though.
Yeah, I'm shocked they were still using it. It was like, okay, it's like one of the things, like, it works, so why change it?
So, how did working at General Electric help build your hardware and chip knowledge? And that's quite an interesting sort of.
But some of my friends who worked at PlayNet with me ended up at General Electric. There were a lot of people from RPI who worked at General Electric via quote unquote body shops who would we weren't direct employees at General Electric. We were contractors employed through a consulting firm. And so I ended up on a RISC processor design team, doing cutting edge 40 megahertz RISC processors in like 86, 87.
You were like also working with VAX machines as well, and
I had a Sun 1 on my desk, and there was a big VAX that I would log into at GE.
So when did you kind of hear about Commodore and like the Amiga, and how did you get involved with those?
So I'd heard about the Amiga in the press, and when I was still at PlayNET, and I was down visiting CVC to give them some support, one of the programmers there showed me a preliminary set of manuals for programming the Amiga, which was going to be introduced later that year. This was like early 85. And I carefully went over to the copy machine and copied the entirety of the Intuition manual and so forth to take home with me. Shortly after it was introduced in 85, I bought an Amiga 1000. And the rest is history.
So did you meet Jay Miner? And
I met Jay later on. I only met him once that I remember. And that was at the 1990 DEF CON in Paris. He was there. That was the first DEF CON after we introduced the 3000, I believe. And I remember, hanging around like the hotel bar with him chatting. along with some other people while we watched the Berlin Wall get torn down.
Wow. Oh, wow. So when you first got to Commodore then, what were you initially working on?
So after GE, I did a small stint where I ported a game for Epix to the Amiga from the Mac. But in the process, I was doing a lot of work on the Amiga and talking a lot on BICs and so forth. And both I and Bryce Nesbitt got hired about the same time into Commodore in early 88. So when I first started there, I was working on hard disk partitioning and other stuff like that, working on drivers for the A2091, various stuff.
The Amiga OS really made the Amiga shine, and I was wondering what the key points were in your memory.
Oh, there's so many. The OS, I loved the OS because it was multitasking. When I first got it, I was like looking to do, fancy networking on the Amiga. I want to do, I ported Force to the Amiga. I was playing around with NetHack. Of course, I love games, but it was like so head and shoulders above everything else technically, and that was what I loved about it. Working at Commodore was quite a trip and interesting, and the friendships and such we made there were very strong and still strong today. There's so many events there. It's hard to give a list.
Well, how did the exec design and an approach to design allow multitasking? And did you feel it was like something that hadn't been done on a home system before, and you were on the edge of something revolutionary there?
It was something that really had not been done before in very many systems at all. The decisions to make things, to not have hard limits on things, to use what effectively would be called now a microkernel, made huge differences. And having the flexibility that gave you to program stuff was, impressive. A lot of systems would have hard limits on all sorts of things. You could only do stuff that was anticipated by the operating system, etc. The microkernel with devices and drivers and file systems and everything else being basically sort of arbitrary objects, made things exceedingly flexible. Even the way we use AA link lists for everything, so that you were encouraged not to put in arrays that would then, you'd end up overflowing and adding limitations. So
I know when the Amiga OS 2 was released, it was, really different to version 1.3. Mm-hmm. And, I know a lot of it kind of got completely rewritten at that stage and modernized. What memories have you got of that time then, and updating the Amiga OS to version 2?
One of the big things that happened, the OS 2 was a big update, and I'll give you one little story about how a part of it happened. We'd have meetings in the software group at the time, run by Andy Finkel, about every 2 weeks, I forget, and to sort of go around the table, say what we've been working on, etc. And so it came around to me at one point when we were, heading towards OS 2, and I said, well, I, did this stuff with the 2 toolbox and so on. Oh, and yes, I ported the entire DOS library to C and assembler from BCPL, and it's up and booting. Now, there was still some more work to do. It was just that, and no one had asked me to do this. I just did it.
Right.
It was just like, I was really annoyed at the DOS library because I'd written a shell before I joined Commodore, a Unix C shell type shell, and the fact that there was all these stupid things due to BCPL in there made it really painful. So I said, could I possibly just remove this? And I started trying, well, maybe I can. And so I ripped out every piece of BCPL in the core OS. I never once ran the BCPL compiler, and got that all up and working for 2.0, and still compatible with all the old BCPL programs, because all the old disks had all these the command line utilities were all written in BCPL, And so I had to maintain all the APIs they needed with a funny upside down stack and everything. And I managed to make all that work.
That's pretty incredible thinking about that you maintain that compatibility. And so I remember at the time, because my first Amiga was a 500 Plus, and that shipped with Kickstart and Workbench 2.0. And here in the UK, I don't know how much you know about this story, but I think basically they ran out of Amiga 500s and just kind of put Amiga 500 Pluses in the box. So you didn't really know what you got until you opened the box at home.
I had not heard that.
Yeah, so it was, you had no idea which machine you're going to get. But I actually loved Workbench 2.0, although I know that it did break some compatibility with games. I mean, was there much of a backlash about that then? Do you remember much about the compatibility breaks?
So I was on the forefront of some pieces of that issue. So there's one story of when we were releasing 2.0 and then 2.04, that was a serious crunch mode time to try to get that out the door. And one of the big issues was compatibility. And so we were literally working around the clock 7 days a week, literally sleeping in a back room on some cots with in the middle of a whole bunch of old arcade machines. I have no idea why they were there. I think they were part of the CDTV team, had them, or I don't know, to try to get it to the point where we could ship it. And this is where the infamous Henry Rubin, "It's darkest before the dawn" pep talk that's recounted on the Deathbed Vigil came into play. I won't repeat the whole thing right now, but and I remember one time I was debugging something with an in-circuit emulator for the 68000, if I remember correctly. And I figured out why an entire company's worth of games were not working. And that's because they'd made the assumption that when you called open device, that the value that was in, I think, A1, one of the parameters to it, when you made the call, when the open device returned, even though the return value was in D0, I believe, that the value you'd put in A1 would now be in A0.
Right.
And it just so happened the case that was before, but A0 was a scratch register. It could have been anything. And the new code, randomly, did not do that. So we had to put in a hack to make sure that A1 was copied to A0, and a dozen games started working. So there was stuff like that. I mean, almost all of the cases of incompatibility were the fact that the games programmers ignored the rules, the
guidelines.
Yeah. Another thing you saw often, even including later, was games programmers trying to play games with the track disk and dealing with the floppy drives directly instead of going through the OS. And you'd change floppy drive to another compatible floppy drive that met all the specs of Commodore specs and all the specs in our documentation, and games would break because there was some slight difference in track to track times or the rotational speed variance or whatever. And I was the one who was responsible for rewriting the entire track disk device to make it much more stable, faster, resilient against errors, etc. And I remember reading through, someone wrote a book on how to use the Amiga floppy. Someone in Europe targeted it, like game programmers, whatever. I went through it and I put Post-it notes everywhere they did something wrong, and it was in the book, and it looked like it was a forest of Post-it notes.
I think I've got that on my shelf. Amiga disk drives inside and out. I think that's all.
Yes. In fact, it's wrong. Very, very wrong.
Well, the structure of the OS as well with those device drivers, it really allows it to kind of expand. And even today, people are doing new ones and adding to the OS. Do you think if it didn't have that, would it have been, as successful or as well used as it is nowadays?
Probably not. I mean, to a certain extent, it would have. A lot of the success was around the whole thing. I mean, that's one of the things that, those sort of flexibilities and the things you could add to it and improve it with are part of why it was so popular and remained popular. They're not all of that. I mean, it probably would have been the same way. I mean, the C64 was not expandable in the same way, but it's still popular. but the Amiga was special because of that. And I think that has had a big play into why everyone thought it was special and still remembers it as special.
Well, I know in 1990, Commodore released something or started working on something. I've got a feeling it was released in 91. There was a little bit left of center, and that was the Commodore CD-TV, which was, if people don't remember, it was a market that I remember Philips were going for as well.
CDI was the competitor.
Yeah. It was a home multimedia box, which it seemed like I remember all the magazines at the time thinking this was going to be like an emerging market and everyone's going to have one at one stage, which obviously never happened. But what memories you've got of CD-TV? 'Cause I heard you worked on that platform as well.
So CD-TV was handled by sort of a separate and almost entirely separate Tiger team run by Don Gelbreth and a few others. So I didn't have much contact with the CD-TV people for the original version. It was happening in there, but they had their own sort of separate area and so forth. For the CD-TV CR, that came back more into main engineering.
Can you explain what that is for people that might not be familiar with it?
So the CD-TV CR was a CD-TV cost reduced. Okay. And this was a redesign of the original CD-TV, which was expensive to produce. To cost reduce it, make more use of custom chips because we had the ability to quickly do gate arrays and so forth with the MOS technologies. Get it all into one simple board, and also add some additional capabilities, and put all the video on a daughter board so that you could have PAL or NTSC daughter boards and have all the rest of it be the same. It had the CD drive didn't require a caddy; it was just an open one. And we saved money by controlling the CD drive directly instead of having a bunch of external stuff. And it also had memory expansion slot built in. You could also put IDE hard drive interface on it, which was the IDE hard drive interface was shared with what's now called the A600, which at the time was called the A300.
Yes.
And I'd written the IDE driver for the A300. And so I was working on the IDE drivers for the CD-TV CR. My understanding is we had CD-TV design was done. Everything was set. We were ready to go into production. But because they had a whole bunch of CD-TVs in the warehouse, they did not go into production. So...
Because there are a few out there, aren't there? I've seen a few prototypes that people have got in their collections.
There are a few out there. There's definitely there were probably 50, maybe 100 built. I don't know. And there were obviously prototypes out around, and there are a few out there that's still working. I still have mine, which never had a case in the first place. Never had a top case, but it has the EL front display. I'm trying to get it working again. But it was a fairly nice design. It was still running a 68,000. Very very compatible with the CD-TV, but had some additional capabilities.
Because I had a A570 CD-ROM drive for my Amiga 500, which obviously, for people who are not familiar with it, that basically was an add-on that you put on the side of the Amiga 500 that transformed it into a CD-TV. And for me, that really came into its own when they started releasing, public domain collections on CD-ROM.
Yeah.
That was like a game changer for me. And that
it was better than having, 20 pounds of floppy disks.
Yeah, 100%. But obviously, CD-TV initially was, they're talking about it being for encyclopedias and atlases and things. Microsoft did later on with Encarta and had success, but I always felt maybe CD-TV was just a couple of years too early. What did you think of the concept and the idea of it, and why do you think it failed?
I agree. It was a bit too early. The concept was good. Having CD storage. You'll note that soon thereafter, PCs started getting CD drives. Started getting we had CD-based game machines, including the CD32, some of the Sega stuff, etc. That rapidly became a popular way to do it because they could be inexpensively produced with existing CD tool sets. So it was just a little early. With certain things that happened a little differently, timing a little different, whatever. Who knows? the whole encyclopedia thing, that ended up being useful, but it was not a prime driver for people to get them in their house. And games turned out to be more effective.
Yeah, and the Amiga had like two kind of lines essentially. You had the professional line with the big box Amigas and higher demands for those, and then you had the gaming line. How important was stuff like SCSI? I know the Amiga 3000 had it, and it also had a flicker fixer built in and stuff. Those sorts of things were really important to the professional market. Getting the better video, getting the access to all the SCSI devices, all the large hard drives, having high transfer rates. You could get access to tape drives and DAT drives and all these other SCSI peripherals was incredibly important at the time. At the time, your choices were like some ancient AT hard disks or SCSI drives. SCSI drives were by far preferred. All the Macs were SCSI. All the Suns were SCSI. Everyone was SCSI. Later on, and we started using this with the A300, A600, A1200, etc. IDE drives showed up, which had much of the capabilities in terms of command sets and so forth of SCSI, but a much simpler physical interface. Not as fast, and often we're not set up to use DMA, though you could. But the IDE interfaces we had were just directly used read memory. You just read from this memory location repeatedly. So they used a lot more CPU time than the SCSI drives we had, but they were a lot cheaper to add onto a motherboard. Were you guys kind of amazed at seeing what people were doing with Amiga, like, with the video toaster? And
video toaster was awesome. It was like, yes, we had pioneered the idea of desktop video, but video toaster took that pioneering and brought it to culmination, a peak. Genlocks and so forth were cool and useful and so forth, but video toaster gave you a full video editing suite, that would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars before, and you'd need like a Quantel or whatever, and you could have that all on your desktop for a few $1,000s. Huge game changer for all sorts of stuff. And that's not even including things like Lightwave and so on for doing 3D rendering using Babylon 5 and everything else.
Yeah, and those were really impressive when I learned that the Amiga was doing the introduction to Babylon 5. I was like, really? Wow, the machine I've got at home is like capable of doing that kind of thing, which was pretty jaw-dropping. Just kind of going back to the IDE interface that you mentioned there, because I remember there's a bit of a backlash at the time about the top-end Amiga 4000 not having SCSI and having IDE on board as well. Yeah. But I think it definitely made sense in the lower-end machines like the Amiga 600 and the 1200. I'm curious because you mentioned about writing the IDE drivers for what was originally called the Amiga 300, that then was rebadged as the 600 and replaced the Amiga 500, which I remember upset a lot of people at the time because, the Amiga 500 was so loved. What kind of memories have you got of working on that project then, the Amiga 300, and that morphing into something else?
Oh, it was interesting. The IDE drives, like I said, they had lots of the capability of SCSI and very large overlap in the command set. They were absolutely a lot cheaper to include, so they made tons of sense at the low end. You waste some CPU time, lose a little bit of transfer rate, but boy, they were so much cheaper to include. I implemented the driver by basically making a IDE drive look like a SCSI drive to the system. Basically, just a compatibility layer that turned an IDE drive to all the other layers of the system, including the partitioning code, for example. It just looked like a SCSI drive and responded to SCSI commands. You'd send it a SCSI command. I would translate that to an IDE command and translate the response. And that worked out really well, very smoothly, quick, and we got good performance out of it. The 4000 was an interesting beast. It was originally they didn't want to do the 3000 plus, which was a higher end machine, possibly with a DSP. And They didn't want to do the pizza box A1000 Plus idea that we had for doing a inexpensive Sun 350 style pizza box with maybe a 0 slot or 2 on the side and an 020 or an 030 and an ID drive and be inexpensive, but still a nice machine with AA. And so the new management wanted to do what they called the A2200 and the A2400 and 3400, which were also at times referred to as the A1000 Junior and Senior.
Just to add to confusion.
Oh yeah, to add to confusion. I've got source code comments in some of the disk driver code for the ID stuff that says that references the A1000 Junior and Senior. And the Junior was, I think, the 2200/2400, and the Senior was the 3400.
Naming anything Junior after the IBM PC Junior would have been a brave decision.
Well, you have to realize that Lou Egerbrecht was helping run the engineering at the time, and he was one of the architects of the PC Junior.
Right, yeah.
So they wanted to do this, and they were focused more on the lower end, and they wanted to just simply have it, have variations of it that were slightly higher end, like 020 versus 030, etc. And, the original 4000s wouldn't have had it on the 040s, or 3400s would not have had any 040s, if I remember correctly. Yeah, maybe not. That's why, for example, I have a CPU card here that says, Commodore, let's see, it says, 3200/3400, 68020/030 Rev 1, which had literally 020s and 030s both on the card.
Wow.
So this was so that this was for sending out to third-party developers who were preparing AA software. And so they could emulate either an 020 based or an 030 based machine just by changing a jumper. So, so originally these were supposed to be like cheaper machines, etc. And they sort of morphed into somewhat higher end machines by the time the A4000 came out. And they didn't I don't think they ever sold the 2200, 2400 setup.
Well, the stuff of legend that we always used to hear about was the AAA chipset, which was a later chipset that was going to come out that was a lot more advanced. And you actually, before this call, told us that you had the AAA chip with you. Yeah.
In my hand, which you cannot see, I have a AAA chip, which might be the only AAA chip still out there. It's a Monica 1201RO chip. I showed it at the Amiga 30th event at the Computer History Museum like 9 years ago. Yeah, they were originally supposed to have AAA done in something around 1990 or maybe 91. Okay. It was already underway when I joined Commodore in 88. It took a long time. And I don't know why I was not in the chip group. The AA was created, we call AA now, everyone else called it AGA, was created as a stopgap by some of the engineers who said, AAA is taking too long, it's not going to be ready, we need something. And, a couple of the engineers had a bright idea, and we got AGA, which was a relatively simple thing for us to do. If it had shipped in 91, it might have made a big difference. It had hugely improved capabilities over the original chipset, on almost every level. Everything from the graphics, obviously, the bit blitters, the ability to support non-planar graphics, which turned out to be important as you start getting into these big resolutions. Even the floppy drive interface, which supported higher size floppies, the audio stuff in Mary, which was greatly improved over what was in Paula, and designed by the same designer who did Paula. Yeah, and it would have even been able to directly drive CD drives using Mary. All sorts of things it could do. But by the time it actually was semi-functional, which was like late 93, early 94, when I was actually working on it, trying to, writing test programs to test the blitter and so forth. It was no longer as game-changing as it would have been a few years earlier. It still would have been very cool, would have gotten a lot of interest, would have been competitive, but it was no longer game-changing in the same way it would have been a couple of years earlier in terms of, the super high resolutions and it still would have had, really strong graphics acceleration capabilities compared to things that existed out there in VGA boards and so on. There weren't many accelerators out there. So, it's really unfortunate. I don't know the details of why it didn't get done in time. I'm sure a lot of it had to do with management. It would have been cool.
I'm curious about that Monica chip that you've got there in your hand as well. So kind of what state was that in? And explain what the chip did. And do you think it could be made to work? What kind of...
there were two, as far as I know, there were two AAA boards that were built and running in the lab. And they did run. I believe they had graphics up and so forth, but only in very limited test programs. One of the problems was that particular rev, and they needed to do another chip rev, had a problem where the interrupts didn't work. You had no interrupts. So I wrote a whole bunch of test programs that would test out, do blitter tests, and would communicate over serial to another machine, and it did it all without interrupts, which was fun. It was a sort of interesting challenge. But they would run. I mean, there were two running systems. Without schematics and all the chips and the internal design of the chips and everything else, which no longer exists as far as I know, you would never be able to build another board like that. And the chip I have no idea if it even worked in the first place. Just something I rescued when everything was getting cleared out.
So now, outside of AAA, wasn't there also a even more advanced chipset in development? That was going to completely change the architecture. I mean, what do you remember about that, and what would that have been like?
Hombre was very interesting and sidestepped a lot of the things that had tripped up the AAA work, I believe. Hombre was the baby of Ed Hepler, who was one of the people who was brought in, who knew a fair bit about chip design and so on. His idea was to, instead of having these huge custom chips with lots of hard-coded logic on them, his idea was to build something that was a processor extension based around a PA RISC core, one of the RISC processors from Hewlett-Packard, and add a bunch of instructions that would let the processor do efficient bit blitting and other things like that, and do it. It sort of foreshadowed the modern system on a chip setups, where all the things are incorporated with the CPU onto one chip. It would not have necessarily been a single chip in implementation, but it would have been something close to it. And we were working with HP on it at the time. I still have some documents detailing how Hombre would work that I showed at the Amiga 30th stuff in a fair bit of detail that I'm going to be sending off to Dave McMurtry to scan in for the Commodore Historical Archives.
That's a wonderful Facebook group as well. If people are not part of that, it's absolutely worth joining.
Dave's great, and I owe him this. I have a box of documents I need to send him. I'm sorry I didn't save more from when everything went poof.
Well, you didn't know everyone was going to be interested in it 30 years down the line, I guess.
Yeah. I was one of a couple of engineers who helped, ex-engineers, after they had the big auction where they sold off the VAX and a bunch of other furniture and all the other things. The company that was responsible for the auction needed to clear out the building, which was full of stuff. And so a couple of us got sort of hired by the auction company to help clear it out, take mounds of stuff down to dumpsters and so forth. And we culled over some of the stuff that we were taking to dumpsters and kept it. And that's why I've got a Commodore 65. I had stuff from my office already, but I picked up a whole bunch of other random items that were just sort of lying around and no one cared about, and were just going to go in a dumpster. So, and I most of the documents I have were from my own files and so forth, but there were, a million documents I could have grabbed that I did not.
I'm glad you saved that Commodore 65. I've seen the prices of those on eBay now, so you made a wise choice there.
I will probably be selling that one. It's fully functional.
Oh, wow.
I was just headed up a few days ago.
You'll have a nice vacation with that money after you sell it, I'm sure.
Well, talking of kind of companies, that were doing amazing things with the Amiga, Scala was one, and Scala had some absolutely amazing stuff that was going on there, and they were growing so quickly. What point did you join them? And
so I joined Scala, a couple months after Commodore went bankrupt. A whole bunch of my friends had already joined Scala, including Peter Turner and Jeff Porter and Dave Haney.
Yeah, there was a lot of the original Amiga team or the Amiga team that went on to Scala straight after. And if our listeners don't know, Scala was a piece of kind of presentation software that had a lot more to it, that would control digital signage, but also have interactive aspects as well.
Yes. And Scala was expanding into the U.S. And over the previous year, had hired Michael Sins and Peter Turner and other people. A bunch of others had gone to 3DO. I had interviewed at 3DO back in '93. They made an offer to me, and I turned them down. I basically said, I don't believe this is actually. I should be in the target market for this. And I don't believe that it's actually, at the price you're going to be asking for, I don't believe it's going to work. So, and turned out I was right. But I joined Scala, and I was also interviewing at DEC, my first SCSI work. But I worked at Scala for about 4.5 years. We did some incredible stuff with graphics and it's sort of a follow-on almost to the desktop video of the Amiga days, and
it's quite crazy because looking at it on the surface, it looks like a titling piece of software or something that would just be very basic, like kind of maybe like a PowerPoint. But then with stuff like the extended scripting languages, interfaces with stuff, you could turn it into a whole like non-linear video editing suite. And what was it like when you started to connect stuff up and get devices working with Scala, Genlocks, all these kind of things?
Yeah, I mean, some of the stuff you could do with the scripts there were really impressive. The ability to make complex things that would show off all sorts of reveals and fades and all sorts of other stuff. And as you said, they could be interactive as well. We were doing using it as a front-end interaction software for some satellite video companies, for example.
So were you working with Info Channel as well? Because just for the listeners, there were two versions. There was Info Channel, which was the kind of high-end presentation software that also communicated on a network. And then there was Scala, which was the kind of software that people could use at home and do their own thing. Yeah,
it was all one and the same internally for us. The core of it was all the same stuff. The Info Channel added a bunch of additional capabilities on top of it. So
and I guess stability was an important thing as well, because some of these machines,
they'd run for weeks.
They have them in a box, running for weeks. And
you had the Amiga experience was a good thing there. Memory leaks are bad. Stability, making things nice and stable was critical when you had no memory protection on the Amiga. We would set things up so that they would run for a very, very long time and be stable. And for all these sort of like rotating displays and cable system, putting something up on a cable system channel, whatever, they need to just be up. It's very, very annoying when you turn on your cable TV and you switch to the local information channel and it's showing a guru meditation error, which I've seen, or equivalent for Scala if it's crashed and sitting at the OS. It's like when I drove to an ATM once and I was like, oh look, there's a Windows NT login screen.
Well, I found it really hard to get Scala to crash. I thought it was really solid piece of software.
Yeah,
and,
we wrote an entire we had an entire language and compiler that was written by Dave Haney. That everything was written in.
And I think it was called Scala Player, but it was kind of a way of having the scripts that would be kind of created in a like little encrypted file system. And
I did all the encrypted, like put all your files into a single file, basically a file system within a file, and encrypt the whole thing. That was something I did.
And that meant you could just pass on a Scala kind of presentation that had already been done.
Right, a single file, just drop it in and play. Yep.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, I was just hiding all the existing files into a single file, make it all look like it was an entire file system worth of stuff to the rest of the Scala software.
Well, another thing that you also worked on was pretty cool, which was WorldGate as well, with a interactive TV and the Ojo video phone as well. Was that kind of directly because you had that world of presentations and displays and wanted to get into that area?
Yes. So when I was working at Scala, Joe Augenbraun, who was one of the other hardware engineers at Commodore, was one of the founding people working at a company called WorldGate to do internet access over cable boxes. And he called me up. I'd loaned him one of my computers at one point to do some demonstrations of how it was supposed to look. So he called me up and said, hey, you should work for us. And so I ended up joining and working on internet browsing via cable boxes. It was we did that for a few years. We got went public, and the company was worth $1 billion. But we couldn't get we were partnered with the cable companies, but you couldn't actually force them to deploy the stuff. They had they would go through mergers and they would have other things they were worried about at the time, and eventually they bought our technology so that they could use it to get out from under patents that TV Guide had, and so they paid us off for that. We basically had to go from like 300 people down to about 20 people. And we decided to totally take that money they'd given us and totally switch businesses and go into hardware video phones, which the head of the company, who was a previous CEO of General Instruments, a big cable box company, he'd always wanted to do. And then we did that in literally from the time we got our first DSP prototype board to when we went to CES with it, 6 months, less than 6 months, and had a working video call to CES from Pennsylvania. In fact, that was the first time we made a call outside of the building, and and the first words spoken over that call when we got it up and working at 2 a.m. to Las Vegas were, holy shit, it works.
Wow.
And so we did hardware video phones for several years. We were partnered with Motorola. They were used for in addition for just general calling, also for video translation systems for people who are hard of hearing or deaf, where they could use sign language over video to an interpreter who would be on the phone to your doctor or your pizza place or whatever. So that was used for that, and it was really well done, worked well. Eventually, we got bought by a company that sold video phones. There were all sorts of things along the way, but I won't go into them. And that company, unfortunately, was a multi-level marketing company. And they fired the original CEO, moved us into nicer quarters, but they were in bed with a TV personality who had a big TV show at the time called The Apprentice, i.e. Donald Trump. And some of our video phones actually appear in an episode of The Apprentice. So yeah, that was fun. But eventually that company, which was they were kind of scummy, not surprisingly, they decided they fired almost everyone except for the engineering team, and then started trying to sell the engineering team to various telecom companies. So all of us, over the period of like 2 or 3 days, en masse quit, leaving them with basically nothing.
Wow. I can imagine as well, like, your experience with video phone and kind of putting live real-time video in there helped you when you joined Mozilla and you were on the WebRTC project and you were doing, audio and video on the web. So
the short story is, after quitting WorldGate, I was brushing up my skills, fixing 10-year-old bugs I've reported to Mozilla. We'd used the Mozilla browser in WorldGate when we were doing the internet browsing over TV, and I'd stayed peripherally involved in the project all the way through. I've been heavily involved back in 2000 through 2003 or so. And so I was fixing some 10-year-old bugs I'd reported, and one of the people I used to work with got on and said, "Hey, Randall, how the hell are you? You need to work for us. We've just a project for you." And that was WebRTC, audio and video in the browser over the web. Because that combined all the browser knowledge I had and all the video communications knowledge I had. And so I was the lead for the WebRTC project for Mozilla, and heavily involved in the IETF and W3C spec side of all this, design data channels, etc., and lead implementer for that. And that's what we're using right now to chat on this podcast.
Well, I was wondering, Firefox is pretty fast, but why do you think people should use Firefox?
A couple of reasons. You're right. Firefox is fast. In fact, I've worked on the performance team there, and we blogged earlier this year about Speedometer 3 results. We've done great on our performance. We're on a par or better than Chrome and Safari on our performance. Our page load performance, we often are significantly ahead of Chrome. So we've been very proud of that. But the biggest reason to support Mozilla is that we're not part of a huge advertising conglomerate. We aren't harvesting all your data to sell, to put you into boxes, to sell your information to and ads to all these other people. We have a mission to all the people, all the users of the internet, to make their life better and to help protect them. That's what we do. We do that partially by providing a product that has those capabilities. Okay. And we take the money we make with that, and a lot of it comes from Google. That's true. To push those things, not just there, but elsewhere, and to stop bad regulations from getting promoted, bad specs that will hurt users' privacy and security. And we have often, though not always, been successful with that. When we were doing WebRTC, we were pushing hard for end-to-end encryption in WebRTC, and we were slowly losing that fight because Google didn't care. They were happy to use the existing telecom standards that exposed all the keys to the people in between. We were slowly losing that fight, and then there was a smaller release of information from Snowden about how people were snooping on all these online communications. And so at the next meeting of the IETF, we called the issue, and we had an almost unanimous result of everyone. They don't vote in the IETF, they hum, agreeing to have end-to-end encryption, which we had pushed for so hard and fought tooth and nail for. And everyone finally agreed to it. And that's why communication like we're doing now is end-to-end encrypted and so much safer for everyone.
And I think that's it's always important, that, isn't it? And I think particularly even more so in the world today. And, there might be people listening who maybe haven't tried Firefox for a while, because I must admit I did download a new version of it, before we had this call here. And I must admit, it does look like it's come on a hell of a long way in the last few years.
There was a time when it had gotten a little more bloated and slow, and we have worked hard to make it more memory efficient, more CPU efficient, faster at loading pages. Like when I was working on our site isolation project, which separates out which responds to all the Spectre issues and so on. I was in charge of the performance for that, because it's a danger of reducing our page load performance. So I was monitoring all our page load performance for that. And when this shipped, not only did we only have like a 5% regression from, 1.5% regression from site isolation, but at the time, we were 10 to 12% faster at loading pages than Chrome was. Wow. Across like 30 some odd different websites that we tracked for this. And we've maintained that, as well as improved our JavaScript performance as part of the SP3 work over the last year and a half. So we're seriously competitive with everything that Chrome does in terms of performance.
Yeah, so I think, if people haven't visited it for a while, it might be worth a look again at Firefox, because I think you'll be impressed at how it's come along recently. So best of luck with you and the team there at Mozilla, Randell. It seems like, you're on a really good track at the moment. And thanks for coming on and sharing some of your Commodore and Amiga memories as well. It's been fascinating to hear those. So thanks again for your time.
It's been fun for me too.